This week I'm going to be transforming this dresser with a laminate top and laminate fronts into a beautifully updated 4-drawer dresser that will look good in any decor. Hi, my name's Andy and welcome to The Flipping Husband. So, can you paint a dresser with a laminate top? Absolutely. Follow along and I'll show you how. One of the first steps that we're going to need to do is to clean our piece. I like to use a mixture of trisodium phosphate and water. I put it in a little spray bottle, give the guy a good squirt, and wipe it down. I plan to sell this piece on Facebook Marketplace as soon as I get it finished. And I don't want the customer to pull a drawer out and see dust and dirt inside the piece when they're putting it in their car. So I always take a few extra minutes and make sure I wipe down the inside as well as the outside. Some pieces of furniture have really cool drawer pulls, and that is the case for this piece. So my plan is to take this hardware off and set it aside. I'll hit it up with some barkeeper's friend, and if I need to, maybe a hit of spray paint to bring them back to life. I'm going to use some 2-part epoxy to help me fix some of these joints inside this dresser. There, with that pretty well mixed up. I'm not sure what happened with my camera, but the audio didn't record for this segment. But basically what I'm doing is I'm taking that epoxy and applying it in the joint that I want to fix. I'm using the pencil. There's probably better ways to apply epoxy, but that's what I had on hand, so that's what I went ahead and used. And after I get that joint pretty well saturated, I'll use a clamp to clamp it overnight until that sets up. To address this problem, I'm going to use my 2-part epoxy wood by JB Weld. I allowed the epoxy to set up overnight, and I'm going to go ahead and pull these clamps off. Earlier in this video, you heard me say that you can absolutely paint laminate furniture. Well, the secret to success is going to be creating a rougher surface for your primer to stick to. Now, paint can stick to a surface in one of 2 ways. It can be a chemical bond or a mechanical bond. When you're doing a laminate piece, it's going to be a mechanical bond. And this 100 grit paper is going to give microscopically a whole bunch of little ridges that primer can hang onto physically, and that's going to give you a real durable subsurface that you can apply your paint to in a later step. When I started sanding the face frame of this dresser, I did discover some solid wood, and I made the spur of the moment decision to sand the finish off, and I thought I could put some stain on there and have a nice contrast between the face frame and the drawers. I ultimately did bail on that idea, This wood just wasn't high enough quality to support a stain. And in the end, I primed the whole piece and I did end up painting it. I'm sticking with the same 100 grit sandpaper to do the scuff sand on the fronts of the drawers. As soon as I'm done sanding, I grab a bucket of warm water and wipe the piece down. I want to get all of the dust off of it that was left from the sanding process. And this is the final step before we put the primer on. Because this piece of furniture has so many laminate surfaces on it, I grabbed my shellac-based primer. I find that this gives me the best results for hiding stains on pieces, as well as great adhesion for the paint layer. Now, shellac does have a kind of a bad rap. It is difficult to clean up, so I always line my paint tray with tinfoil, and I bag my roller and brush between uses. Now this brush right here is pretty stiff, but as soon as I dip it in the shellac, you'll see me here kind of softening up the bristles. This shellac bath actually will reinvigorate this brush and make it usable again. It's a great trick. You don't need to clean your brush between uses for a shellac-based primer. This primer is very thin. It's almost a water-like consistency. And I find great results using a foam roller to apply it. The one thing that you always have to keep in mind is you don't want to apply too much pressure with that foam roller. You'll end up putting too much product in a couple of places and you'll end up with little lines on your piece. So I always try to go back over my surface right after I put the primer on with very light strokes. And that way I can be sure that there's no roller marks left in the piece, because this does dry very fast. In fact, I put on 2 coats. I always aim to have the first coat be very light, very thin, and if it's blotchy, that's fine. By the time I work my way around the piece, it's ready for a second coat. And I often will grab a 400 grit sanding block and give it a light sanding between coats of primer. That way I'm not building up any rough spots as I work my way through these coats. I personally like to give it a day, or at least overnight, after I apply the primer before I go to the next step, which is the sanding. And for years and years, I've always grabbed an old worn out piece of 220 grit sandpaper for this step. And recently I bought this 400 grit sanding block, and let me tell you guys, this is a game changer. So if you take anything away from this video, spend $5, get a 400 grit sanding block, and use that on your primer before your first coat of paint. One final step after sanding is to wipe the entire piece down with a damp cloth. I'm just looking to get all of the dust from the primer off the piece before I apply the paint. And for this piece, I'm going to be using paint by Fusion Mineral Paint in the color Emerald. I apply my paint using a microfiber roller and a brush in the places that I can't roll. I know I'm going to need to put at least 2 coats of paint on, so for this first coat, I'm looking just to get a nice even coverage, make sure there's no roller marks, no brush marks. I'm not terribly concerned if I can see some of the primer through different parts of the paint. I know I'll pick that up on the second coat. Hey guys, so this is the night after I put the original coat of paint on this dresser. I grabbed a 400 grit sanding block. I'm going to give this guy a quick sand and apply the second coat of paint. I work my way around this piece with the sanding block, using my free hand to feel the texture of the piece, and that lets me know if there's any additional areas that I need to sand. Now, as far as the second coat of paint, I follow the basic rule of my first coat of paint. I want a nice, light, even distribution of paint. And definitely, I want to hit the spots that I missed with the first coat, in that little corner there. But the objective here is to make sure that there's no roller marks or no brush marks. Most of the time I'm working on these furniture flips pretty late in the evening, which is why I might be genuinely perplexed on why this piece is shaking right now. And then I realized it's actually not fully on its support. Alright, well that's it for tonight. It took me about 30 minutes to get the second coat of paint on this piece. Now I'm going to go in, clean up my brushes, and call it a night. The next day I headed back out into the shop and grabbed my gold metallic spray paint. And I gave the hardware 3 light coats of paint, building up the color. After that I had a chance to dry, I went ahead and put the hardware back on and reinstalled the gold spline. That gives a little bit of character to the piece. Now when this is done, I'll go ahead and take some pictures and we'll get this guy up for sale on Facebook Marketplace.